Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. In this special segment, we're going to discuss diversity and security. But before I introduce our guests, I have a quick announcement. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to view the agenda, register for free. Doug White actually is facilitating a diversity panel as part of Unlocked. But we have a couple of those guests with us today. So let me introduce our guests for this discussion. First, I'd like to welcome Jackie Abrams. She's the Vice President of Product at Domain Tools. Jackie, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also, we have no stranger to the show, Gabe Gumbs. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Spirion. Gabe, always a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
Also no stranger to the show, Mandy Logan. She's the Ambassador for Mental Health Hackers. Welcome, Mandy.
Why, thank you. It's awesome to be here again.
And last but not least, Susan Bosco. She's the Associate Provost for Academic Affairs at Roger Williams University. Susan, welcome.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
I'm going to start with Susan. I introduced her last, but I want to start with her because I think part of diversity in security starts with diversity in academics. Mm-hmm. And I want to start, when I entered my undergraduate career as in 1988, I walked onto the campus of Case Western Reserve University as an undergrad in electrical engineering, and there was one woman in my class. I knew of two in the entire engineering program back then. So my question is, how are we doing on the academic side from a diversity perspective? Because I think that fuels the diversity on a broader scale in the industry. Are we making progress there? It has to be better than it was back then.
Absolutely. We now have, I would say, if we look at our engineering programs, we have probably about 25% women, and we've also added many female faculty as well. When we look at computer science, though, we still don't see as much representation as far as women. Now, if you shift over to information technologies, there are a lot more women getting degrees in those areas, so close to 40%. So that has changed a great deal. So we have that genesis, but where we end up with problems is moving from there through to the career and then expanding on that. So there's been a lot of progress from studying these topics, but we need to look at translating that into industry.
And that's where I want to transition, I think, a little bit to Jackie when it comes to one of the articles I put in the show notes for this section was an article Ann Johnson wrote December of last year, about a year ago. I worked with Ann at RSA Security. She's now overrunning the cybersecurity internally for Microsoft. Very well known. She says in that article, it says about 20% of women have penetrated into the industry. Jackie, so I'm curious, how has that increased in the last year? Is 20% the right number? I'm not quite sure. I've tried to find some different research topics on this, but is that 20% roughly still right?
So the 20% is roughly accurate. I mean, look, you'll get a bunch of different statistics from a bunch of different sources, but in reality, what we're looking at is that women only make up at most a quarter, a fifth of the workforce in cybersecurity, and that is not nearly enough. So even though that may be an accurate number today, it is certainly not the right number. One of the most valuable things in cybersecurity that we have is a diversity of perspectives, and that's because actors, threat actors, attackers, they are diverse. They're thinking of clever ways to get around our defenses, and we need different perspectives to help us be more responsive and to stay a step ahead. If we always look at things from the same angle, we're quite frankly going to fail. And it's hard enough to be a defender as it is. We can give ourselves every advantage, and we should be doing so by bringing in people with different viewpoints.
Yeah, I want to get there on how do we facilitate that in a little bit. But again, one of those, no, that's good. I mean, you set it up right. But a couple of the other articles I pull in talk about that diversity, right? And also making us more resilient. And this is where I want to, kind of get Gabe into the discussion. And Mandy, when we think about the aspects of, as we think about diversity of thought, diversity of people, other things in the environment, how does that help us be more resilient long term? Because these articles tend to say, if we have higher diversity, both on the gender and the ethnicity side, we're more resilient. And we're better prepared as an organization.
You want to jump in there first, Mandy?
Mandy?
Oh, yeah,
either
please
one.
do.
Oh, no, I was saying if you can jump
Oh,
in.
I thought you said you wanted to. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Well, I absolutely believe that resilience is inherent in many people who have had to struggle. And I said I would come at this actually from a different angle because, say, for me, higher education was not within reach. There really was not a way to go that route. And so it is, I believe, imperative within the industry to recognize that there are a lot of roles that can be filled and that can be done very well without a specific bachelor's degree or master's degree or PhD degree, that there are many, many people who are very successful in cybersecurity and information security that do not have any background or access such as that. The resilience then, say, like from my background coming from rural Arizona, where we did not have internet at home, there was not access or even really knowing that cybersecurity existed. And yet it just dovetails so nicely with a lot of the things that you're trained as working in rural areas, working with wanting to do good, wanting to help people, wanting to be able to do something from your home that actually helps your own community. And with being able to work in cybersecurity, a lot of times remotely, being able to be self-guided in learning and in taking steps, I feel it absolutely draws in a resiliency to the workforce by allowing people from many broad and perhaps very poor or very disabled backgrounds to even know that cybersecurity exists as a possibility.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And so instead of trying to build on that, why don't I maybe add an analogy that I think our audience can appreciate? You wouldn't hire a penetration tester whose only experience was in attacking CGI websites from the early 2000s, right? You would equally want some diversity of skill sets. And so that same is true in terms of lived experiences. Those lived experiences allow us to look at problems from different angles, and as such approach them with different problems. It brings different empathy points as well too, which is just so incredibly important in understanding the challenges that we're trying to solve for.
Yeah, agreed. Now, as we think about, in the Discord channel, there's some lively discussion actually going on right now. Adrian mentioned that when he was doing research about 10 years ago, about 10% women, now we're 20 to 25%. So we've made some progress. The question I want to pose to the panel, and I don't really care who starts first, but if are we making enough progress? I'll get to what we need to do, but in the last 10 years, if we've gone from 10 to 20 to 25, is that enough progress in this space? And then we can talk about maybe ways to improve that.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in because I came to information security in a roundabout way in more recent years. Previously, prior to having injuries that created greater disabilities, I worked in construction. I inspected commercial construction sites, and I worked with very large commercial contractors and governments and lawyers. And in what I did, it was 3% female. So when I entered into the hacker world and into InfoSec and cybersecurity, it actually was incredibly encouraging to me to see the 20 to 25% female and to see that I could attend and interact with communities online that were female focused, very accessible, or were non-gender focused whatsoever. And it was a beautiful thing to me to see the attitudes of the people present within this very new industry that do not have the same rigorous standards of that this is how it is and this is how it has always been. So I do think there's a lot to be said there, that it is significant to notice in 10 years, there's a 10% increase. Think of in construction, it's been 100 years and there's been 2% increase.
Interesting.
Yeah. I kind of want to challenge the question. And I agree that we are making progress and progress is good. But instead of asking, are we making progress or enough progress, are we making the right kinds of progress? You opened up by talking about access to education, for example. So are we making the right kind of progress in that area? Are we making the right kind of progress? And Mandy touched on in terms of having access to the right tools, right? So 14 million Americans don't have any internet access at all. 25 million don't have access to broadband. That covers both rural and inner city. In the inner cities, places like New York, 27% of households lack broadband altogether. 70% don't even have a computer in their home. So are we making the right kind of progress might be where I want to focus that question.
Gabe, I think that's a fantastic point, right? I started at academics. You're starting even before academics. I mean, we're talking, and I meant at the college level, right? The degree programs. I mean, you're going back even further to maybe the root cause of this is, do we have enough access to the internet and technology to actually embrace and enable children at the early stages to even want to take on careers in a science-based or computer or security discipline?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can speak from my own experiences. I was fortunate enough to have that type of access. At a very young age, I had that access. And I can draw a straight line from being immersed in that world and in those communities to where I am today. And so I can only imagine what it is like to not have that access. In fact, I can't imagine what it's like to not have that access. But I can certainly picture that if you are not exposed to these things at an early age, you can't see yourself being there in the future, or you start well behind the starting line, right? Someone who at the same age as I was when I was first exposed to technology, who didn't have technology, by the time we both get to college level, by that point, I will have already been far ahead than that person was in terms of understanding technology, using it, and all those things. So it certainly starts well before you even get to the higher levels of academia. And COVID's only exacerbating that problem now too. So if you have no internet access in the home, then that puts you further behind in terms of just traditional learning. And if you do have access, but maybe you don't have high-speed access, or you only have one computer share amongst multiple siblings, those things are all going to negatively contribute to this problem.
Well, I'd like to tie in together, I think what Gabe and Mandy might have been going on some of this. And I can tell you, as recently as my class that I am just finishing up now teaching this semester, I had probably a quarter of the students who consistently had issues trying to get on to classes the days I did remote learning with Zoom, where they couldn't use they didn't have enough broadband to use both their video and their audio. So this is not even, it's a problem that's continuing, I think, as you mentioned. So when you don't even have that access, one thing is you can't visualize, but the other is technology becomes such a frustration. You can't imagine wanting to be in an industry that deals with technology. And on the other hand, it's also that ability to see yourself in those fields. And in reading about the interest in IT and cybersecurity specifically, there seems to be such a lack of awareness of access, career path, and a question I have, because I'm not in this field specifically as you all are, is do you feel that the presence of women and different ethnic and racial groups is visible enough, considering the type of career and work that you do?
I can jump in there quickly. I would say no, it's not visible enough. While there are pathways for people to get involved, and there are groups, community groups, organizations, Black Girls Code is great. WISP does a lot of fantastic things. They're not necessarily highly visible throughout people's developmental stages when they are selecting their career path. I read an article recently that said that most women have ruled out cybersecurity as a potential job by the age of 15. First of all, I had no idea what I would end up doing when I was 15, and I certainly didn't think this. But the fact that people are having experiences with cybersecurity and enough to actually rule it out, that they think it's not a place for them, it's not welcoming, they can't learn it, they're intimidated, that's really a problem. And it's compounded by the fact that there aren't necessarily a lot of really easy pathways in for those who are looking to dip a toe in the water in cybersecurity and try it out. We propound this by our job descriptions, the requirements that we place upon experience for someone coming into a role, our desire to fill jobs with unicorns who can do everything, and don't pay them well on top of it. And we don't really have a path for someone who's entry level who needs to learn. We always seem to be wanting someone who can come in and do the job day one. And we need to really build up our mentorship starting from a very, very early age to make this viable and to bring people in and make it a welcoming community.
So, Jackie, I think that's a great transition point to talk about how do we fix this? Because you brought up a very good point around, young women have ruled it out by the age of 15. By the age of 15, I knew I wanted to be an electrical engineer. Now, somehow something was exposed to me that I knew that, but I'm not there anymore, right? I made a very interesting pivot and shift out of that, right? But I knew early on. So how do we get it visible earlier? I know that some of our folks have talked to high school students, but at 15, you're already in high school or right at that cusp, right, of getting through high school. Is that too late? And so my question is, how do we get it visible maybe for a little further back into the middle schools? What do we do as an industry to get our profession visible in a way that we can influence younger people at an earlier point before they make their career decisions?
If I may, I have a couple of ideas on that. First and foremost, I would say going back even before discussing having access to internet or having the equipment at home to look at this as a viable option, thinking back on my own journey from very young, I would say the single greatest thing that kept me from pursuing my passions and even things I had an aptitude for and that I would figure out how to get to was that literally the attitude that I perceived from the majority of professional people that what they did was brain surgery. the attitude that came across from white collar workers was far more detrimental to me being able to consider myself as being able to pursue this career. It really had nothing to do with, oh, I don't have a computer at home. Like, I would go use the lab at school. I could go to the library and I could read books. I was tenacious enough, and a lot of people who are underprivileged are, because we are used to having to do that to survive, that it was much more primal in the attitude that was perceived. So I could say right now, one thing would be that every single worker, while taking in pride and accomplishment and what they have done and their education and their work, is really stepping back on coming across to anyone as if what you do is so technical and so advanced that it becomes unattainable to someone like me, who was very young and impressionable. Otherwise, I would say as well, like, I think including CTFs at middle school level and at elementary school level, increasing the number of video games that reference and show the securing side of the technology, because there's so many people with a natural aptitude to want to do perhaps a law enforcement type career, and then understand, oh, maybe I don't have to go into the military or join the police academy. I can do that same type of securing the entire country and my neighborhood by learning cybersecurity. And it's incredibly simple to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. I don't know
Orange
the answer.
County. Go ahead, Gabe.
No, I was just saying, I don't know the answer on a larger scale, and I'm sure there's someone smarter than me that can figure it out. Someone mentioned, like, the Black Girls Code, that group, etc. But my own personal experience prior to being sent to our collective mole huts with this current plague, I would go to a couple of elementary schools a few times a year. One where a relative of mine works at. And I had a very personal experience there where I'm talking to the kids about my chosen profession, and just kind of talking about some of their own experiences with technology. And one kid in particular started walking me through a scenario where he had figured out how to exploit a video game in his library to get more lives and more gold, etc. And in his brain, he didn't put together the one-on-one of what I do with what he was doing, which is to say, the aspect of testing and breaking and hacking the system with just his joy for finding loopholes to playing the game more and further, right? And I think it's being able to help make those connections on a personal level, on a one-on-one level, that is very powerful. That obviously doesn't scale for one person, but I think what I'm getting at there is, it does take more than one person. It takes all of us reaching out where we can, when we can, to make those types of things possible.
Yeah, I went down earlier this year, right before the lockdowns, to Orange County, Florida. They do a CTF at the high school level. But Mandy, what you said is bringing that back into the middle school and the elementary. I don't know anybody that's bringing it that far back.
Really? You don't know anybody using like Pico CTF? Or, I mean, I've interacted with elementary school, and I've worked with a number of kids who are around 8 to 10 and go through Over the Wire or through Pico CTF. And they instantly start putting together like, oh, you mean I could do this? I could do this. And or they start learning about password managers, and they start telling their parents about this. They absolutely thrive on understanding it. And so even when I'm speaking with elementary age students, they have no barrier to understanding that it's needed. If they have an aptitude for it or an interest at all, there's almost no barrier to understanding like, oh, I really like this and I feel good in this. And since they understand, I feel like a lot of children very young have a very deep understanding of being able to connect to what makes sense. It makes sense this needs to be secured. It makes sense that we can do this because, and then some of them will look at it like, oh, this means that I can become a black hat hacker. Some will go that route, but there's a good number that still take it then as a very viable, needed thing and kind of take it as a passion.
I like the gamification angle because I think it fits in well, especially with like my son. He's not interested in cybersecurity at all. He's a mechanical kind of kid, which is fine, but he loves his games. And if you can introduce some of these concepts and gamify it for some of these kids at earlier ages, then I think that helps. So I think there are some interesting things there. I think there's a whole like new industry of cybersecurity games that somebody can come up with and help our younger folks get interested. I want to switch back to Jackie for a second. When we think about the enterprise side of this, what do we need to do at the enterprise level once you're out of school? How do we continue to encourage and develop diversity programs when we're in the industry or as we're coming into the industry? What are some of the things we need to do there?
Well, that's always a challenge, but it is one we can rise to meet. As I was talking before about the unicorn problem, a lot of the different things that we're looking for in a given employee who can do everything is much more attainable if we look to find it in employees who can do something well and then need training or cross-training or mentorship to build their skills. And we need to invest in providing those kinds of opportunities. We also need to make sure that we publicize those opportunities where we're looking for individuals with certain characteristics or capabilities rather than, say, traditional experience. We can bifurcate our job postings, take someone who wants to do everything. For example, even at Domain Tools, we are actively working to correct this. We had a job description that we were putting out for a data architect for platforms. Now, that required initially a data architect who could do double duty as a platform architect with more than 9 years of Python experience. Data architecture and platform architecture can, in fact, be different things. You take that job description, you split it out into 2 roles with discrete characteristics. Or when you start looking at reviewing your job descriptions, look at the language you have, make them more acceptable, make them more desirable, make them feel more approachable. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You just have to be really good at critical thinking. Try to pull in people from different areas who may not have that. And then within an organization, really make a commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity. These things take time. They require investment from management. You have to introduce new, more junior employees to the field and then give them the skills, training, and most importantly, coaching they need to be successful and to build a career in the field. This doesn't happen overnight. As I mentioned earlier, everyone wants to have somebody come in and start excelling in the job on day one and doing the work of 5 people. That's not sustainable. If we want to truly build resiliency, we have to look for those individuals who are interested and passionate, and we have to help them build that interest and passion by making it seem like a viable long-term career choice. These are things we need to invest in and get better at. And it's not going to happen overnight. It only happens with commitment. We have to do things like unconscious bias training. I actually just had one yesterday, and it was a fantastic experience. But that highlights things like looking at your interview processes and examining how you can adapt them to be more accommodating to different communication styles and cultures. Part of it, as was said earlier, is the intimidation factor. There's no reason this has to be intimidating. Yes, it could be an ego trip, but that's not going to help us out in the long run. And we have to move away from it.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about, having the skills, maybe not, you don't necessarily need the degree. We always talk about aptitude and attitude. And I think part of it is, how do we craft those job descriptions? What requirements do we put in them? Do they really need, 15 years of experience in AWS cloud when it's only been around maybe 15 years, right? Or do you need a master's degree, or not to knock Roger Williams or anything, Susan, but sometimes for certain jobs, maybe the degree's not required. And so if we build the job descriptions and the job posting better, then maybe we attract more people into our space.
Well, to go to your point, I think, in Jackie's as well, is if you do want to bring particularly more women into this industry, what generally happens is when women look at a job qualification list, they make sure that they meet 100% of it. where a man will apply for a job with maybe half of those characteristics. So the more requirements you build in, the more that females are going to filter themselves out. So right at the entry point there, if you have job descriptions, I think as Jackie mentioned, with all of those listings of degrees and years, and you're going to immediately lose a part of the workforce that you want to bring in because you do want to have different perspectives. So that entry point alone is really important. And on the tech side, you're in a really unique position that a lot of other industries are not, where you're able to build resume review processes that help to focus on skills and not an individual's demographic characteristics. And that also helps you to bring in people who have the skills you want and not rely on that model of, continuing to just create more of the same as what you have in your company. So I think, you're in a great position to bring in that better, broader pool that's going to really meet your needs and be a group that you can develop. So I think you're in a good spot there.
Gabe, I think I heard you chime in a little bit. I want to give you an opportunity to answer because you're also on the enterprise side as well.
The only thing I would add, because I agree wholeheartedly with every single thing that was said there. In fact, I think Mandy heard me repeat exactly some of those same things yesterday, right down to the resume requirements. You cannot have 8 years of Kubernetes experience. You can't have it. It doesn't exist. Take it off your resumes or off of your job requirements. It's not a thing. But there's that. There's the over reliance on certifications in some areas. But as someone who also builds technology, I think part of it is that we do not make it approachable enough. Part of the esoteric nature of what we do, or at least that perceived esoteric nature, on top of us wanting to think that we are a bunch of rocket surgeons, is that we make technology that does not allow for us to have entry-level skills enter the job. So folks at certain junctures start needing higher levels of skills just to be able to fulfill these roles, because we're still building technology that just does not meet those needs. A large part of that is a byproduct of the way we bring products to market. And so UX becomes oftentimes the last thing that is paid attention to. And by that point, the technology is matured. There's so many things that we can address just at the upfront of the tools that we even introduced to the space. And then everything else that the panel has said here so far, I would just double down on. Great.
And
yeah, Mandy, go ahead. I don't want to forget you.
Well, thank you. To add to that, looking at things that I would adore to see enterprise level and entire industry wide would be reaching out and companies working very directly with their local vocational rehabilitation centers and with their centers for independent living, perhaps establishing ways to do internships that allow people who are either disabled and looking to return to work through a ticket to work program, or who are these specifically are more for disabled individuals, people with learning disabilities who are autistic like myself, different things, who are learning how to support themselves, who have mass amounts of latent skills. And these are the areas they get directed to, the vocational rehabilitation centers and the centers for independent living. So if at the enterprise level, you reach out to your local agencies like this and start networking very specifically so that the career counselors realize this is actually a career path they could look into. Start setting up internships, different things that allow people to perhaps keep their benefits that they need while slowly learning about the industry, and then they become a full-fledged employee. Those are some things that I would adore to see done.
All great suggestions. We could probably go on for another half an hour, but I'm going to try to keep this segment succinct. Jackie, Gabe, Mandy, and Susan, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Enterprise Security Weekly for this discussion.
You're welcome. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having us. It was wonderful.
Cheers.
Welcome. If anyone wants to attend Unlocked and watch Doug White's diversity panel discussion, Gabe and Mandy are on that as well. Please feel free to register for free by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week on Enterprise Security Weekly.